If you watch other creators who make content similar to mine, there's an extremely high chance that you have heard of Postra. Similar to what I do, their content generally consists of video essays discussing various pieces of horror media, whilst being represented by a talking mascot. Even if you haven't heard of Postra, there's a pretty high chance you've seen this little guy around before. But what you might not have known is that Postra actually has more characters. Back in 2022, Postra uploaded a video titled The Many Mascots of Postra, which showed off some of the characters that he had made before settling on Clyde. On top of being really cool looking characters in general, Postra also did something expressly unique with these characters by eventually using them as the monsters in an analog horror series of his own creation, Dreams of an Insomniac. And man, is it damn good. I know I might sound like a broken record at this point, as I very often call the internet horror I cover on my channel underrated. And being that Postra is a rather large content creator, calling Dreams of an Insomniac underrated almost feels wrong. But I don't really care, I still think it is. Out of all the analog horror I've seen, it has some of the most interesting horror writing and creature designs, some of the best cinematography, and hands down, the best music. I want to convey my love for this series to all of you guys, so today I'm gonna cover the 4 episodes it currently has to offer. After every episode, I'll include a brief analysis section trying to piece together hidden details, plot points, and etc. I'll also talk about why I liked how certain parts of the video were written or presented for when the series particularly impresses me. At the very end, I'll talk about some of the open-ended questions I still had after thinking about the entire series as a whole. With all that out of the way, my name is Minaxa, and today we're going to take a deep dive into Dreams of an Insomniac. Before we dive into the rest of the video, I'd like to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, StalCraft X. StalCraft X is a free-to-play FPS/MMORPG inspired by the Stalker series. The game has something for everyone: PvP, PvE, faction wars, a quest-driven storyline, and more. Very soon, the game will be getting a massive global update. A ton of new features can be expected, such as an all-new expansive storyline in the Northern Lands, new faction war mechanics, a new loot system, personal shelters that can be decorated, and more immersive, smarter NPCs. To top it all off, graphical improvements and a new animation engine to make the game look better than ever are also coming soon. It's safe to say that big things are on the horizon for StalCraft X, and now's your chance to get in on the action. If any of what I said about the game resonates with you, use the link in the description or the promo code to receive a welcome bonus for both new and returning players. Remember, the game is free to play on Steam, so if you're interested, there's really no reason for you not to try it. Head to the link below and try out StalCraft X today. We start the series off with Dreams of an Insomniac Volume 0, which is titled Haunted Halloween PSA. The video is split into parts, each being labeled with YouTube chapters. The first part is the introduction, which begins with some basic exposition. Your name is Tommy Merrick. While visiting your old family home, you stumbled across a strange box of tapes in the attic. Out of curiosity, you decided to watch them on your old CRT. You think they might be haunted. While watching the tapes, you began to see and hear things that weren't really there. For some reason, they felt oddly familiar to you. After that, we move on to Bizarre Break-In 1986. In which we see a newspaper clipping with the headline, Bizarre Break-In Leaves Civilians Confused. The break-in in question occurred at a Halloween shop called Grimso's, with the glass front door being smashed in. Although the inside of the place was trashed, according to an interview with the store owner, only one item was actually taken throughout the ordeal, a random costume. For some reason, there was no security footage of this event. Because of the incident's bizarre nature, nobody in the quiet community of Eastridge County really had any idea what the motive behind it could have been, especially since no money was taken. A skeptical civilian named Sean Grimm was interviewed for his thoughts regarding the matter, and he thinks that the whole thing was an elaborate scheme to get more eyes on the small town newspaper that reported the incident, since no money was stolen despite the place being trashed. So if that tells you anything about how questionable the nature of this event was, it really didn't make any sense to anyone.
Whether you believe this ridiculous story or not, one thing is certain. Do not trust anyone you see wearing this costume on Halloween night.
In the next section, Halloween of '86, we cut away to a news report detailing the disappearance of 6 children in the Eastridge area. These disappearances would occur at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening before ending exactly 1 hour later at 7. A local witness, Alex Williams, described his involvement in these events. It started out as a normal Halloween night, with everyone out and about trick-or-treating as you would expect. At some point, though, a mother comes around the corner looking for her missing kid. Everyone starts to look up and down the street trying to figure out where they went, but nobody thought anything of it. I assume because there were so many kids out. But then another mother shows up, and another, and now everyone is panicking, the police are involved, but still.
Nobody knows what's going on, nobody knows where these kids went, and nobody knows who did it.
The names of these missing children are Jason McDonald, John Thompson, Ashley Wright, William Lewis, Norman Harris, and Sam Wilson. Although police spent the better part of the night trying to figure out exactly what had happened, neither the children nor any local suspects were identified in the end. However, an eyewitness report did manage to give a description and illustration of the culprit. It was said to be wearing a striped orange costume with horns, having a long tail, a black mask, and bright yellow eyes and teeth. It is then advised that all local residents refrain from approaching this figure. One of the officers on duty that night, Officer Kruger, had some words to share during this report.
It breaks my heart to hear the horrible tragedy which has come over our town tonight. I promise, not only as an officer on duty, but as a father myself, that these children will be found and the culprit behind these horrible kidnappings will be brought to justice.
Finally, the report ends with a general warning for the population to stay indoors, keep doors and windows locked, and finally,
it is heavily advised to not trust anyone you see wearing this costume.
After that, we move along to the next section, fast forwarding 3 years to police training tape 1989. In this section, we quickly learn that there in fact was security footage captured of the break-in at Grimso's, which occurred on October 6th at exactly 6 a.m. However, it does seem like the footage that actually was captured is extremely limited. At first, things were only slightly abnormal, with the lights turning on their own at 6 a.m. At 6:06, motion detection captures another frame, but this time the lights are off and the store is already trashed. And after that, those 2 photos and the eyewitness descriptions are the only information the police were able to uncover about the anomalous entity that they've dubbed the Eastridge Demon. That is, of course, until today. In this next part, we learn that Officer Kruger underwent years of mental and physical therapy after making direct contact with the anomalous entity. Once he had finally recovered, he was able to tell the police of the information he learned, which led to the creation of this very police training tape. First off, the creature is capable of both visual and auditory hallucinations, making it extremely difficult for individual people to properly track it down. Because of this, all officers must operate alongside a partner, take particular note of their surroundings, and make sure not to trust anything they see or hear if they have any reason to believe they're hallucinating. Easier said than done. Second, direct contact with the entity causes extremely unusual physical deterioration, as seen by the before and after photos of Officer Kruger. More specifically, the list of abnormalities includes discoloration of the Overall, it is advised that safe distance between officers and the demon be kept, to only approach if absolutely necessary, and get immediate help if contact is made. Next, the tape describes how the Eastridge demon is actually extremely intelligent and aware it is being hunted. The demon will try to take advantage of you at your most vulnerable. Do not be fooled by the demon's hallucinations. Do not let the demon make physical contact. Do not make any attempt to communicate with the demon. It will steal your voice.
Do not trust anyone you encounter wearing this costume.
Beware the smiling snatcher. The final section of Volume 0 is where it gets its name, the Haunted Halloween PSA 1993. It begins with footage which I assume to be from some piece of horror media, but at one point it freezes, and then an EAS warning plays. We then get to see the PSA itself, titled Rules of the Season, presented by the Lankman Foundation and illustrated by Mortimer Gray. The PSA serves to remind the residents of Eastridge about the Smiling Snatcher. The narrator clarifies that the monster is quote-unquote very real and threatens the safety of all residents. However, as long as the citizens follow the 5 rules, they should be perfectly safe. Rule number 1 is to remember the 6 p.m. curfew, as that is when the Smiling Snatcher comes out to play. Rule number 2 is to keep all doors and windows locked, so the Smiling Snatcher cannot come inside. Rule number 3, you do not hear the knocking at your doors or windows. Rule number 4, you do not hear the knocking at your door. Rule number 4, if you see or hear someone you know outside past curfew, it is not them. That is the Smiling Snatcher wearing their skin. Rule number 5, do not trust anyone you see wearing this costume. And that was the end of Volume 0. Although the credits begin to roll, there is a to-be-continued teaser at the end with a character that doesn't mean anything to us now, but will very soon. And now I'd like to take some time to analyze the episode and point out some things that I thought were cool, starting with the opening exposition. I like how we've actually taken the place of a specific character, finding all of these tapes in a family home. I know that this trope is relatively common in analog horror, but I have faith in the series to make something interesting out of it. This section of exposition at the beginning gives us the preface for the Halloween PSA being haunted, which makes sense because we can actually see the demon's face overlaid throughout most of it. It also immediately gives the story a point in the far future the events will be leading up to, because the word old is used multiple times, as in old family home and your old CRT. And the whole time you're going through the series, you're just wondering how long it's going to take to get to that point. I also thought it was very interesting that the public was explicitly told there was no security footage during the break-in at Grimso's, despite it clearly existing. This means that the police acted to specifically hide it from the public, likely out of fear that it would cause mass hysteria in an otherwise quiet town. I feel as if the quiet town aspect adds another layer of horror as well. The citizens of Eastridge were probably used to a feeling of safety and security, letting their kids roam around the streets without explicit supervision during Halloween, but we all know how that went. I also thought the execution of revealing more and more information regarding the properties of the monster was really well done, especially considering most people who were on Postra's channel already would have known pretty quickly that this was his main mascot being the monster. The line, "Do not trust anyone you see wearing this costume," hits even harder when you have this in mind. Next, I'm gonna tackle an elephant in the room I'm sure a lot of you took note of, as it is pretty obvious that the photos of the kids in this episode were produced with generative AI. It is important to keep in mind that this first episode came out in late 2022, a time where generative AI was newer and under considerably less scrutiny. I certainly can't speak for all artists, but as an artist myself, I would have much preferred generative AI be used to conjure up fake pictures of missing kids over photos of real missing children. This was also the exact logic by which Postra operated at the time when they made the decision to do this, and I personally think it was totally fine. If we think about it for the merits it actually provides, the generated AI photos are also inherently uncanny due to their nature, which I think adds to the sense of unease. Moving on from that little tidbit, immediately following the section with the missing kids is when we get the witness drawing of the culprit, and I really like this illustration. During this section, there's also some really interesting sound design going on in the background, which the series in general does a pretty good job at.
Witness report described the culprit as wearing an orange, striped costume with horns, a tail, and a black mask depicting bright yellow eyes and teeth. It's advised that all residents of Eastridge County avoid.
There's also a secret at the end of Officer Kruger's speech, actually. When the visuals fade to black, you can see something else on Kruger during the fade, which foreshadows his fate after direct confrontation with the demon. A similar instance of foreshadowing happens at the end of the same section, with the demon's face from the security footage fading in at a low opacity in the background right before the next section starts. Speaking of the next section, although it was relatively prevalent even before this, I noticed the use of the number 6 being really frequent. The break-in happened on October 6th, 1986 at 6 a.m. Motion detection was at 6:06 a.m. Not only that, but the number of kids who disappeared was 6, and the Smiling Snatcher comes out to play at 6 p.m. Really, the frequent inclusion of this number 6 should have pretty obvious thematic meaning. Within Christianity, 666 is commonly associated with demons and the devil, and considering we're dealing with the Eastridge demon, it makes total sense. I also thought the description of what happens to you when you make contact with the demon was really interesting. The section takes the trope of cutting away to something disturbing during a list, which is very common in analog horror, but adds some sick-ass music and genuinely gross imagery to make it work. With the descriptions being so graphic, it also helps to kickstart your imagination as to what exactly happened to Officer Kruger. He had to deal with total deterioration of his body and mind and underwent mental and physical rehabilitation for 3 years just to arrive at a state where he could convey information to his colleagues. Any other aspect of his well-being is completely unguaranteed, and that is genuinely actually scary. Finally, during the Halloween PSA, I noticed that the dialogue sounded almost like it had to remind people that the Smiling Snatcher was a serious threat, with lines like, "This monster is very real." Considering the skepticism that was seen by the interviews following the initial break-in in the Halloween of '86 incident, it's possible that even 7 years later, some people in the Eastridge County area are still unsure if this is even real or just some urban legend, though it feels almost impossible to deny the very real missing children. The PSA also seemed to allude to a ghost character, which seems to represent the children out trick-or-treating using this generic blanket ghost costume. It was also used during the section where it's described the demon will attempt to trick you into opening the door by wearing their skin. Although it would obviously be terrifying if this was more literal, I have a theory that this was the demon just stealing costumes from children they had kidnapped and wearing them. After all, it's already wearing a stolen costume. From there, it could copy the child's voice if it had attempted to communicate, and very effectively try to make its way inside an unsuspecting parent's home. It's also possible that the demon could just look at a costume that a kid is wearing and then copy it using visual hallucinations. But I think it would be cooler if the demon was actually wearing it. The final sequence of the episode, which I did not describe before and simply let play, has these images flashing behind with the artistic depiction of the demon in the foreground, and I think it's a really cool inclusion. One thing I also noticed during this part was that the uncensored picture of Officer Kruger post-confrontation is included in the background. There's also some other images not previously seen in the episode as far as I remember. At this point, we need to briefly stop and wonder why Tommy Merrick's family home even had all of these tapes in the first place. It is certainly a valid claim for him to say that they might have been haunted, as we saw and heard things in these tapes that certainly weren't meant to be there, just like he said. Ironically enough, seeing and hearing things that aren't really there is one of the powers of the Eastridge demon, and it may be possible that it had some kind of effect on the physical media left behind. Unfortunately, we don't really know anything at all about Tommy Merrick's involvement in this mystery, at least for now. If we want to search for answers, we'll have to continue to the next episode. In Loving Memory. In Loving Memory opens with a slow fade-in of Officer Kruger's photo, followed by a hard cut to the local skeptic from the news we saw previously.
Wow, this whole thing is just a bunch of malarkey. A bunch of kids going into some Halloween store to steal a costume? Yeah, no. If you ask me, this whole thing is just some trumped-up news story for some small town...
Alright, cut, come on. You think anyone's gonna believe this? We're trying to make a news story here, man. Come on. What do you mean we're running out of time? Fine, we'll use one of the older cuts.
After that, we get our title card, and then we cut to a new screen. In Loving Memory of Kenneth Kruger, 1956 to 1987. The following eulogy describes a feeling of sorrow over Eastridge County, quote, this Halloween night after the tragic loss of Officer Kenneth Kruger. He was said to be a loving father and integral piece of the local community.
Kruger's passing occurred late into the night, with officers discovering his body after they had received reports of his son, Klaus, being heard screaming from inside their home. After arriving at the scene of the crime, they found his body hanging inside his son's closet.
A mysterious note was left behind by Kruger on his son's bed. According to the rest of the speech, the leading theory as to why he would have committed suicide was the compounding guilt over not being able to save the children lost on Halloween night of the previous year, eventually for him becoming too much to bear. The speech then comes to its conclusion with what I assume would be a suicide hotline. At first, the text reads, "You are not alone, just call this number to seek help." But it then switches to, "You are alone, this place will be your tomb." We then cut to a new, assumably more believable birth and death date for Officer Kruger, 1956 to 1996. Rather than the idealized depiction he received in his eulogy, we get to see what he truly looks like.
Help. Please help me. I just want to die. Why won't you let me die?
Because I still have use for you yet.
Similar to before, there is a brief teaser following the credits that shows the same red eyes we've seen multiple times now, but their owner still remains unknown. Although this episode was only just shy of 4 minutes long, even with a 30-second credits sequence, it is surprisingly rich in lore and new information. Starting from the top, it's obvious to us now that the quote-unquote skeptical civilian from Volume 0 was being used in some way, shape, or form to manipulate the public perception of the break-in incident. This was most likely in an effort to feed the public the opinion of it being some fake conspiracy rather than a real threat. Unfortunately, the act of keeping the public unaware, despite the very real danger, was seemingly a misstep because we now know that 6 children ended up going missing later that same month. Moving on to perhaps the most obvious discrepancy within the video, Kruger's alleged suicide in 1987. This is something that I can't pretend to truly understand, as it's obvious to us that Kruger definitely did live long enough to undergo therapy and inform the police of the properties exhibited by the Eastridge Demon in 1989. This is 2 years after he allegedly dies, and the death date is 1996, which is even more time. But this doesn't explain why his son Klaus was screaming or why a body was found in his home with a note he supposedly wrote. It is entirely possible, due to the nature of the demon, that many of these aspects that seem to be real were hallucinations, which makes it pretty hard for us to tell what's real and what isn't, and I think that's exactly the point. Considering this eulogy mentions the incident occurring on Halloween, I think that lends more credence to the theory that hallucinations had something to do with it, as the Eastridge Demon would have been out and about at this time. Though the Eastridge Demon is incredibly intelligent and aware that it's being hunted, I'm not sure why it would ever think that intentionally doing this whole sequence of actions would have any benefit to it. It feels more like some third party had something to do with it. Speaking of the note that Kruger left behind, I'm gonna try and take a second to give my best approximate transcription of what it says, which was greatly assisted by this person in the video's comments, so thanks for that. To my dearest son, I know that you may be confused by everything going on over the last year. It's not fair that you had to deal with it, and I'm sorry that I can't be the father I needed to be to help you get through it. Truth be told, your old man has had a hard time processing it himself. You spend so long with everything being the same that the moment that everything changes, you can't accept it. I might be wrong, but I just can't. I think every day about what I would have done if it were you that was taken by that thing. It chases after children, not just me. Though, does it make everything that they... And the rest of the paragraph I don't quite understand. When you grow up, I hope that one day you'll be able to protect your own son. To have such a life, you deserve to be happy. And the rest of that I also can't read. I'm sorry I won't be able to give you that life. Your old man is out of time. The final sentence in the note is basically unintelligible, but it's clear that the end is Kenneth Kruger signing off. There is clear evidence of sentences having been erased from this final section of the note, and in fact the last few frames of the note showcase an entirely different final paragraph. But I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea what any of it says. I'm sorry. However, it might be important in the future just to know that there are 2 different versions of the note. This entire note makes me continue to question the validity of Kruger's suicide, because the writing in the note seems extremely genuine and it's in line with his character. I guess it's just not supposed to make sense, at least not yet. In terms of Kruger's son Klaus, I'm not sure what, if any, important information we can ascertain from him just existing, though it may be worth mentioning that he seems to share a name with one of Postra's many characters. Although it isn't explicitly in the video like last time, the description continues the parallel story of Tommy Merrick with the following message. After viewing the first tape you found in the attic, you found yourself too afraid to put anything in your VCR. Trying to forget about what you saw, you went to bed that night to try and get some much needed rest. But those things you witnessed, those things you heard, they kept you up. The curiosity began to eat away at you, so you went back to your CRT late into the night, and despite your fear, you put in another tape. I think that whole thing is pretty self-explanatory. It's talking about how Tommy was scared to watch more after what he saw in Volume 0, but he was kept up, and out of curiosity, he just decided to continue watching, and he put on the tape, which we got to see in this episode. Finally, towards the end of the episode, we hear the voice of a character currently unknown to us. However, we can gather some insight from the credits, which label the role as the Doctor, which also lines up with the way he speaks to Kruger. For whatever reason, Kruger was kept alive, hidden from the public for years, even though he had supposedly committed suicide, and only the police and this doctor seemed to know about it. And it also seems like Kruger's specific condition following his encounter with the demon may have been of special interest to the doctor, but only time will tell. That's all this episode has for us, so let's move on to Family Photo Album. This entry in the series begins with a fade-in of a familiar silhouette, followed by warning text that reads, "The viewing of this tape is meant only for the eyes of authorized Foundation personnel. Unsolicited viewings may lead to termination." Then we once again get our title card and cut to some exposition. It describes how the Eastridge County Police Department received a call on January 6th, 1987 from a distressed man claiming something was trying to break into his home. However, once they arrived, they came to realize the home was empty. The only remaining evidence was a photo album and a camcorder. Upon inspecting said photo album, detectives were baffled by the fact that almost every photo within was somehow physically distorted, to the point that identifying the people within it was extremely difficult. The camcorder, on the other hand, seemed to depict footage of what happened that very night, as we fade in from the family photo to see text that reads, January 6th, 1987, search number 6. We see the unnamed individual trekking through the snowy streets of a random Eastridge suburb, the night tinted with yellow. Next, we see another of the distorted album photos labeled as First Night Out. Upon questioning neighbors of the house they received the distress call from, the police were stunned to find that none of the neighbors could provide any useful information regarding the family. One resident even went as far as to say no family has ever lived in that house. It was like they never existed. We cut back to the camcorder footage, the individual now traversing through a dark and unlit graveyard.
Sammy? Sammy, is that you? I'm right here, Sammy. You're gonna have to help me though, honey. I can't find you.
We once again see a picture from the photo album featuring what appears to be a sheet ghost costume, titled Goodbye. The descriptive text implies to us that this incident may very well have been the moment the police realized that what they were dealing with was explicitly not human. We now find ourselves in a home with the camcorder now placed on a table. The man is pacing around his room on the phone with the police. He talks about how he didn't get a good look at the thing chasing after him, but he assures the police that it's the demon. As he waits for dispatchers to arrive, he sits in a chair with the photo album in hand, likely reminiscing. This solemn moment is tragically interrupted by a blinding flash of yellow filling the room.
Why do you keep using this face? Why are you doing this to me?
The camera, still fixed in the same position, now echoes the blue lights of police vehicles outside.
Hey, Chief. I think I found something.
Finally, the episode ends with one final photo. It is the only clear photo of the perpetrator, titled, "I Love You." Even immediately at the beginning of the episode, Family Photo Album drops some bombs that are extremely important to the overall story. First of all, we have the authorized Foundation personnel message, which further confirms that some third-party organization is at play, and we actually have heard of this foundation since it was briefly mentioned in Volume 0. It's the Lankman Foundation, which was responsible for the PSA. Not only that, but the character silhouette here has glowing red eyes and looks almost exactly like the one we saw at the end of Volume 0. And at this point, all evidence laid bare, it should be fairly obvious that this is building up to our Doctor character, which we met at the end of In Loving Memory. Moving on, it seems as if the Eastridge demon may be capable of further lasting physical distortion or hallucinations, which is something that I guessed might have been responsible for the haunted feeling of the PSA tape. This is reflected in the state of the family photo album and the altered memory of the neighbors. Surely this is something that couldn't have possibly happened without some kind of supernatural interference. It's also worth noting that the prominence of the number 6 continues in this episode, with search number 6 being conducted on January 6th. With regards to the search itself, those paying close attention may have realized that the man recording the entire ordeal called out the name Sammy, which lines up with one of our missing children, Sam Wilson. Therefore, the man recording this is likely Sam's father. Noticeably, the family is also missing its second parental figure, even though a mother is clearly shown in the photo album. The demon even refers to him as an empty man in an empty home. This means that Sam's father likely only had his son left until the demon took him away. This is probably why he allowed himself to be tempted and, in the end, taken by the demon. One interesting detail that I noticed that made me kind of think is the demon's use of the word they. They're still here. They scream your name. They miss you. The use of the plural word they implies that the demon is using multiple people as leverage in this manipulative situation, which wouldn't make sense if the demon had only taken his son. This almost leads me to believe that the demon might have also taken his wife, but this is kind of a stretch. If this were the case, though, it would make this dialogue that he has with the demon a lot worse than it initially seems to be. Another line that really made me think during this sequence is when Mr. Wilson says,
Why do you keep using his face? Why are you doing this to me?
"Why do you keep using his face?" If we take a quick peek back at the Haunted Halloween PSA from Volume 0, the sheet ghost costume is used to describe how the Smiling Snatcher will wear the skin of others to trick people into letting it into their homes. We also, during the ending sequence, get to see a picture of this sheet ghost. This sheet ghost costume is featured prominently multiple times in this episode, as well as front and center in the thumbnail of the video. I believe this sheet ghost is meant to directly represent Sam Wilson. Therefore, I believe that this final photo is the demon mocking Sam's father, as if it was foolish for him to even try looking, and how he won in the end by getting him too. Moving on, I want to briefly touch on how surprisingly rich the direction and cinematography is within this episode. First of all, I'm personally not very picky about VHS effects, but I feel as if the effect massively improved in this episode compared to the first two. The main point I actually wanted to talk about, though, was the use of color. with yellow light being used to show the glowing eyes and smile of the demon, in a way that comes off as genuinely terrifying with how it overwhelms the frame. I also thought that the way this episode subverted the captioned image trope was genius, with the image being used as a setup to frame the transition back to the camcorder footage. The camera use in the final sequence is also really impressive in my opinion. The angle actually makes sense because it's just the camcorder being placed on the table, but it's still framed in a way that comes off as very visually interesting, and once the super strong colored lighting comes into play, it just all comes together. Once again, the description contributes to Tommy Merrick's story, with a new paragraph for us to read. Looking through the collection of tapes once more, you find a set which seems out of place. They're kept in a separate box with the name Alex Williams crudely written on it with what looks to be a cheap black marker. Looking inside, you can see that all the tapes within are labeled as being part of a Foundation archive. Curiosity gets the best of you once more, and you put the first tape you find into your VCR. Now, I wouldn't blame you for forgetting who Alex Williams was, but he was a witness who came forward following the events on Halloween night back in 1986. But it really seemed like he was gonna just be a random one-off character, so what does he have to do with the Lankman Foundation? Well, let's go ahead and find out in Dreams of an Insomniac, Volume 1.
My name is Alex Williams. I live on 66 Elk Crescent, Eastridge County, and up until this point, I've worked for the Lankman Foundation, a job which I have quickly come to regret. This is my story.
Volume 1 begins with us immediately being reintroduced to Alex Williams. Alex says that he was hired by the Foundation pretty much the day it was founded, and they approached him directly in his home saying it would be best if he worked for them as a form of witness protection. He was told the information he had was too valuable, and he was monitored 24/7 basically for years. He compared it to being under constant house arrest. At the time, nobody really had any clue what the Foundation was doing or what it was for. All he was told was that they were helping Veldigan victims. Wait, what's a Veldigan? We transition to the next section where a logo for the Lankman Foundation fades in.
Hello? You don't know me, but I certainly know you. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lankman.
In this little cartoon, we find out the Foundation was founded 4 years after the original Halloween incident, which would make it about 1990. The cartoon was made to commemorate the creation of the Foundation, with the illustration work being done by Mortimer Gray, a name we can also see in the 1993 Halloween PSA. The cartoon calls the monsters in the series the Veldigan and continues to refer to them as dangerous creatures, plural, which means the Eastridge demon is not the only monster. In fact, probably far from it. The reason for the creation of the Foundation was allegedly the containment of and treatment of those affected by the Veldigan. It was founded by Herbert Lankman, allegedly with help of the inheritance money obtained from his father. Using this money, he repurposed the Lankman Asylum into a treatment center for Veldigan victims. Notably, the Lankman Asylum is described as old, and the presumably large amount of money left behind implies to me that the Lankman family is both of high status and has been in Eastridge County for a considerable amount of time. This is further implied by the fact that the Foundation has been giving generous donations to the Eastridge County Police Department on the grounds that it allows them to dedicate more resources to protecting citizens from the Veldigan. The cartoon ends with the mascot Lankman offering the Foundation's hotline for anyone who seems to have questions regarding their organization.
We know these last couple of years have been scary, but don't worry. Soon enough, this will all be a thing of the past. If you or anyone you may know have any questions regarding the Foundation and what we do, do not hesitate to give us a call.
We now get to listen in on a phone call made to the police on April 6th, 1990. Every record of this call, aside from the tape we're viewing right now, is set to be deleted.
Eastridge 911, where is your emergency?
This is 45 Elk Crescent. Send the police, please!
Can you describe the situation to me, ma'am?
There's a group of men trying to break into my house. They're slamming on the door. Please send the police now!
The police will be on their way in a moment, ma'am. I just need you to breathe. Did you get a good look at these men? What did they look like?
I don't know what they look like. They're all wearing masks. I can't see their faces. They look all the same!
What kind of masks, ma'am?
Yellow ones? They're wearing yellow masks. Do they look like bandages? Hello? Hello, is anybody there?
After that footage ends, we abruptly cut back to Alex's monologue. This time around, he describes how strangely particular the procedures at the Foundation were. Immediately upon being hired, he and all the other employees were bombarded with countless rules, most of which didn't make a lick of sense. However, the strangest mandate that they had to go through with was the pair of specialty goggles that everyone had to wear at all times. Apparently, they were supposed to protect against some hallucinatory environment which would make you see or hear things to keep patients in line and treat them through exposure, whatever that means. The patients at the asylum seemed to all have similar symptoms, and they were always afraid of the employees no matter how hard they tried to reassure them. They also complained about hearing some sort of horrible music coming from somewhere in the facility.
What got to me the most about it, though, was how normal everyone treated it. Something beyond our understanding was being used on these people, and nobody seemed bothered by it but me. They all just treated it like it wasn't even happening.
We then cut away to another piece of media from the Langman Foundation, though this time it seems to describe what the hallucinatory environment Alex mentioned actually means. The bullet point benefits of this technology are that it creates accessible treatment through exposure, better control over unruly patients, and improved methods of concealment. The video also describes this environment as state-of-the-art, as if it's some great feat of technology. After describing the supposed benefits, it then lists the precautions that need to be taken in order to ensure it works correctly, the most important of these being to never remove the goggles provided. It then talks about symptoms of certain hallucinations, such as the warping of the environment around you, entryways and exits appearing or disappearing, and seeing people that do not exist. Next, the narrator describes how they have yet to come up with a solution for auditory hallucinations, though they do also have a list of those you should expect to hear. These include the voices of people that do not exist, distant, discordant music, the voice of Dr. Langman asking for your aid, and the knocking of doors and windows that do not exist.
Moving on from our patented hallucinatory experiment, we next must discuss the role of another very important part of our facility. It is imperative that all staff members avoid any form of contact with the...
We abruptly return to Alex's dialogue in which he expands on the concept of the caretakers. The caretakers were arguably the strangest part about the Foundation. They were tall, their skin covered in bandages, and they wore all black from top to bottom. None of the employees were allowed to interact with them, apparently because their jobs were just that important. Alex recalled seeing them take patients from their rooms to places he never got to see, and that's about all he knew that they did. He never bothered to investigate anything past that about them, just kind of minding his own business. That is, until one day when a random woman was admitted into the facility. She had no diagnosis, seemingly completely fit physically and mentally. This was strange, but per usual, everyone including Alex ignored it and minded their own business. By now you've probably noticed that this whole operation is pretty suspicious and seems to be built around employee complacency. As long as you mind your own business and do what you're told, nothing will happen to you. However, that night, the woman started screaming. Alex was the first to arrive at the room she was staying in, and he watched as 4 caretakers forcefully dragged her out of the room. He wanted to do something about it, but a fellow employee stopped him, looked him dead in the eye, and told him it's not worth it. Even though he couldn't do something then, this was the moment Alex realized enough was enough. This place was supposed to be a treatment center, but it seemed more akin to a prison with shady goals and practices than anything else. After this, he tried going around asking his fellow co-workers for information they had regarding the Foundation so he could make the whole ordeal a public controversy, but nobody wanted anything to do with it. Everyone kept telling him the same thing, it's not worth it, and he ignored them and decided to keep going. If the employees weren't going to help him, then maybe the patients could, specifically the woman from that night.
Please don't hurt me. I promise I'll behave. I don't want to go back.
Listen, I don't want to hurt you, I promise. I'm just here to ask a few questions is all. I'm sorry about what happened to you the other night. It was horrible. I want to try and make sure that doesn't happen again. And it would help a lot if you could answer my questions.
Okay.
Throughout the interview, Alex asks the woman various questions. He first asks why the woman is even here. She doesn't have any diagnosis or appear to exhibit any symptoms of Veldigan's sickness, and she says she has no idea why she's here. The caretakers broke into her house, took her away in the dead of night, the police hung up on her call, and then the doctor told her that she's sick, but she has no idea what that means, which makes sense, it's too vague. Alex then asks if the woman knows where she was taken by the caretakers, to which she says,
I don't know. He told me I can't tell anybody. I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. He said he would take me back there. And I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
She can't say. He said he would take her back there if she told. The woman starts to kind of freak out, but Alex reassures that she'll be safe and won't be going back.
It's all right. You're not going to go back there, I promise. I just need to know where it was. Nobody else will know.
They took me to room 66.
What? No, that's not possible. There's only...
It's him! He's going to take me back there! Please don't take him back!
He isn't going to take
Don't let him take me back! Don't let him take me back!
Quiet for a moment,
Just what do you think you're doing?
We abruptly cut back to Alex, and he recalls how everything that happened after that is a blur in his memory. The caretakers came into the room and took the woman away, and he never saw her again. Then he was sent back to work, like nothing even happened. Regarding the whole ordeal, the strangest thing of all was the woman's mention of a room 66, a number which should have been physically impossible, as the asylum was only built with 65 rooms. Alex searched for an answer to this problem, thinking maybe it was just a mistake on her part, but that just wouldn't make sense. Finally, he came to a shocking revelation. During one of his watch-throughs of the interview he recorded, he realized that there was a security camera in the corner of the room. The asylum didn't have security cameras. After finding out this information, he went back to check several patients' rooms for cameras, and he found nothing. No cameras. Something wasn't adding up. Alex thought maybe he was just seeing things. And maybe he was.
Late one night when no one else was around, I tested something. Something I was afraid to. I removed those goggles they gave us. And when I opened my eyes, everything looked the exact fucking same.
Now that Alex knew the truth behind the goggles, a whole mountain of questions arose. If taking them off made everything look exactly the same, what could they have been hiding for those who weren't wearing them? Cameras? Doors? Rooms? Suddenly everything made sense to Alex, and that night he returned to the asylum with the camcorder once again, knowing he could use it to help him identify anomalies previously unknown to him. And just like that, he found it. room 66.
I stood in front of that door for what felt like an eternity. A part of me wanted to know what was in there so badly, but another part of me just didn't want to see it. I was terrified, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. It didn't even feel like I was in control of my own body as I pushed that door open.
Help me!
Looks like someone wandered somewhere they aren't supposed to be.
At that moment, Alex finally understood what all the patients were so afraid of. And for the first time, he saw Dr. Lankman's face. As Alex stood there, frozen in front of Dr. Lankman, having been caught wandering somewhere he should not have been, despite all logic, Lankman let him go. Just like the incident with the interview, there was no punishment, no reprimand, and nobody found out. Dr. Lankman simply acted as if nothing had happened, almost like it was a trivial incident not even worth his full attention. That is, until a recent other incident.
For a while, Lankman acted like that night never happened, but ever since the recent incident, things have changed. He and the caretakers have become more aggressive. I've started seeing things. Cars passing me by with tinted windows, people following me off the corner of my eye, staff treating me like I don't even exist. Recently, it feels like they don't want me talking anymore.
Another thing that had happened recently is the Foundation giving Alex a different job far beyond his credentials, and he was shouldered with the responsibility of researching somebody dangerous. Due to the circumstances, Alex believes the Foundation was planning on disposing of him the moment they got this information off of him, and that's why he recorded this tape that we're watching. However, he describes the information he's learned through this research as invaluable, and he even knows some things that Lankman doesn't now. Alex plans to meet with this person that he was researching, and depending on how it goes, we may never hear from him again. As a final note, Alex says that he's left something behind for whoever is watching this tape. The last thing a friend of his was able to leave behind before they got to him. An archive of the Foundation's most important tapes. If something happened to him, whoever found these tapes needed to do something with the information.
I don't want to go about this alone, but as things are, I've had no choice. It just feels good to finally get this off my chest.
And that was Dreams of an Insomniac Volume 1. As the credits roll, we see Lankman's red eyes in the darkness behind Alex Williams' now open door, and the final shot teases what more is yet to come. Okay, so I have a lot of notes and random things to say about Volume 1, like I wrote 3 full pages of notes on my rewatch, but just like before, we're gonna start from the beginning and go through the episode in order, talking about all the stuff I noticed and the theories that I have. First of all, as I've already pointed out, the character Alex Williams originally showed up as a witness in the Halloween of 1986 incident, and I was really surprised to see him return as a character with actual relevance, which kind of just goes to show how well planned Pastra's writing is. As a continuation of the series trend, the video has many mentions of the number 6 theme, starting with Alex's home address of 66 Elk Crescent, and it happens again later with the date of the random woman's kidnapping from her own home, which occurred on April 6th, and of course, again later on with room 66. It's pretty evident that this whole kidnapping sequence with the random woman was put here to demonstrate that Lankman's inheritance money was vast enough that he could afford to regularly pay off the police. This allowed the Foundation to kidnap people from their own homes without law enforcement interfering. I think this concept is extremely scary, especially considering how just a few years prior, Eastridge County was an average small-town community where everyone probably personally knew and deeply trusted the local police. It reflects on the shallow integrity of the police and how easy money was able to make them stop caring about the people they were supposed to protect. Though, if you're from the United States like me, this is nothing new. This whole ordeal almost makes me wonder if the police were also paid to lie about Officer Kruger's fate, or if the news was paid to lie about what happened during the break-in. Was Kruger's run-in with the Snatcher even a coincidence, or was it perhaps a setup due to his unwavering dedication to protecting his people? A dedication so great that he could have believably been driven to suicide over not being able to do that duty. Maybe Lankman knew that he'd be a problem, so he took him out early, though it is worth noting that all of this is explicitly before the founding of the Foundation, but I don't think that matters, seeing as the discrepancies go as far back as 1986 where our story begins. I would be willing to bet money that Lankman had something to do with it. At the very least, it certainly seems like Lankman is willing to go to ridiculously immoral lengths just to learn more about the Veldigen and the ways that they affect people around them. Moving on, next I wanted to talk about the list of hallucinations in this one section. In all honesty, I can't tell if some of these are meant to have a deeper meaning or are simply there to reflect the properties we already associate with the Veldigen, but the one that stuck out to me the most was the distant, discordant music. Throughout the series, the Eastridge Demon, or the Snatcher, had a very distinct recurring song. And this was the closest thing that I could think of to refer to discordant music. I also found the caretakers to be extremely captivating as secondary antagonists, even though we know very little about them and have hardly gotten to see them. I think just the idea of these almost higher level workers within the Foundation that the normal employees aren't even permitted to interact with is super intriguing. And the fact that they're fully covered also makes you wonder if they're even human? I don't know, anything goes. Speaking of the caretakers, it is extremely odd that this random woman with seemingly no symptoms was taken from her home by them. We know based on the credits that the big dude in room 66 is named Winfrey, and my guess is that some people with no symptoms or any relation to Veldigen at all are periodically taken from Eastridge by the caretakers as sacrifices, and that is why Lankman pays off the police. The fact that Dr. Lankman referred to the woman as being just sick in ambiguous and vague terms might have just been him being like, yeah, I don't even care to come up with a better reason as to why you're here because I'm gonna feed you to Winfrey anyways. I think the hallucinatory environment of the Foundation Asylum could possibly be being held up by Winfrey or some other Veldigen. If it is Winfrey, I think this might be the reason why Lankman retrieves humans for them to feed on. It's to maintain this hallucinatory environment to control the workers and patients to his whims and needs. It's a sort of trade offering. After all, it's clear that Lankman was kind of just sitting in the room with Winfrey and he wasn't being attacked by them or anything like that. Per usual, I also want to dedicate a moment to discussing how ridiculously good this series is in terms of its artistic merit. I was especially impressed by the original soundtrack in this episode, finding myself immediately wanting more internet horror to have music this damn good as soon as I finished watching it for the first time. I will also always appreciate the very colorful lighting used for Alex's recording in his room, which shifts from green to its complementary color red during the moments of highest intensity towards the end. The camera work in this one once again is also brilliant. A large majority of the episode takes place with a door center frame in the background. Alex's bedroom, the random woman's front door, the patient room during the interview, and even the hallway footage leading up to the doors to room 66. The camera's almost always looking at a door, and this of course includes the credits where Alex's door has mysteriously been opened. And interestingly enough, the door behind Alex actually opens between hard cuts while he's still talking to the camera, which to me, paired with Lankman's eyes in the doorway during the credits, may mean that it was too late for him to go meet the mystery person we know nothing about. Speaking of this mystery person, the end of the episode gives us a lot of new questions that we don't have answers to quite yet, such as the recent unknown incident that caused the caretakers and Dr. Lankman to become more aggressive, and also being given a job that doesn't fit his credentials. He also talks about someone he cares about having left behind the Foundation archive, which Tommy would later come across because the attic had a box labeled Alex Williams. Speaking of Tommy, this episode also tells us more about what's been going on his end, and this time around, it's a lot more information than usual. After watching the collection of tapes, you knew what you had to do. Late that night, you left your home, hitching a ride with a taxi and making your way towards that place you saw in the tapes. You didn't know what to expect when you arrived there. For all you knew, it may not even be around anymore. The thought of what you might see there terrified you, but filled with a new purpose, you marched towards it regardless. Your driver dropped you off far from your destination, not wanting anything to do with where you told him you were going. And so, you walked. For hours, you walked along a pathway of dirt and gravel, passing through a part of the county that felt like a ghost town. It had been so long since you stepped foot here, yet everything felt so familiar. The moon loomed high overhead when you finally arrived at your destination, the Lankman's asylum. The place was now boarded up and abandoned, a husk of its former self. You stood in front of the entrance to it for what felt like an eternity. You knew what you had to do there, but you didn't have the strength to do it. Eventually, the dread became too much to bear, so you turned away and got ready to walk all the way back. But then you heard something. A bellowing, calling to you from deeper within the forest. You recognized the creature's call and moved beyond the asylum as you ventured into the forest to meet someone you never thought you'd see again. I think after that, we've got a really good point to segue into the final section of this video, which is going to be my remaining questions that I hope we will eventually get the answers to. First off, I want to talk about the side plot with Tommy Merrick. I think it's honestly one of the most interesting parts of the whole series, even though it would be pretty easy for someone to miss it entirely if they just weren't paying attention. Based on the information we've gathered, it's abundantly clear that Tommy's story takes place long after the events we get to see depicted on the screen. The fact that he believes the tapes to be haunted, in my opinion, serves as proof that the Veldigan are capable of permanently altering the physical properties of certain objects or things, which would also explain the family photo album and missing memories of the neighbors. The fact that he finds all of these tapes we're viewing in his family home also makes it clear that someone related to him may have had an integral role in the past, since we know Alex had a friend who left the Foundation tapes behind. I believe it is also possible that Tommy may be more directly involved in these events than is suggested, since he has stated multiple times that a lot of things feel oddly familiar to him, but he doesn't actually remember anything. Perhaps he's a character with some kind of memory loss. That's kind of stretching things. Considering Tommy's strong conviction after he views the Foundation archive, it seems Alex's call to action spoke to him. However, this doesn't explain why Tommy decides to go physically all the way to the asylum in the first place. We don't actually have any idea why he did that, especially if it's already closed and abandoned, seemingly alongside that whole part of town. The ending paragraphs of the final section to Tommy's story so far are also extremely vague, vague, describing a bellowing from the woods beckoning to him, and a creature that he somehow recognizes is also described as someone he'd never thought he'd meet again. It tells me that it's likely a Veldigan he's talking about, as he refers to it as a creature but then refers to it as someone, unless there is a Veldigan scream but then he meets a person. But if my original assumptions are correct, then we're left with a handful of interesting questions. Why does Tommy recognize the call of a Veldigan? And I mean, the questions don't stop there. By extension, knowing that Tommy has the Foundation archive tapes, we can ask more questions. What happened to Alex? And who is Alex's friend that provided the archive? And how did this archive end up in Tommy's hands? Who is the person Alex intended to meet? And for more general things left open-ended, we also still don't know the true goals of the Foundation and Dr. Lankman, what the caretakers actually are, what really happened to Kenneth Kruger, or how many of the Veldigan there are. The series, despite not being that long, has already crafted a deep narrative with a bunch of questions desperately awaiting solutions. And like I always say, all we can do is wait for more to uncover the truth behind the mystery. I really like Dreams of an Insomniac. In general, any creative endeavor Postra works on always seems to satisfy my taste for horror. Like, if you haven't seen his Jeff the Killer rewrite, you should. It's actually incredible. Anyways, it's clear to me that there's a lot of planning for the long game being put into place here, especially if you consider that before Dreams of an Insomniac, there was an entire ARG that seems to have a pretty decent bit of overlapping information, though we have received explicit confirmation that everything outside of the video series is not canon to Dreams of an Insomniac. Between the amazing writing, exceptional direction and cinematography, and not to mention ridiculously good original score, Dreams of an Insomniac manages to deliver a somehow underrated horror experience from one of the genre's biggest content creators, and it's certainly still only in its beginnings. I look forward to seeing what more Postra has in store for Eastridge County. That being said, my name is Minaxa, and that's gonna be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.